script called Ronnie Rocket. And I worked on that script in a bedroom in my parents' house. I had just gotten married for the second time, and my father, to kind of help out, bought an old house in Riverside, California, and said, you know, Dave, you and I can fix this place up and sell it, and the profits will be yours as a wedding gift. So I went out and had a great time working with my dad fixing this house up. And each night after dinner, I'd go into this room and write 10 pages of script. And I had that whole thing idea in my head, and after 30 days, I finished Ronnie Rocket, the first screenplay. I wrote a couple of different drafts. But anyway, I then set about to try to raise money for Ronnie Rocket, but I had zero luck. My friend, Stuart Kornfeld, was helping me. And even with his help, I had zero luck. And I thought, well, even though I want to make Ronnie Rocket, I think I better try to perhaps direct somebody else's script. So I asked Stuart if he knew of any other scripts that I might direct. I called him on the phone, and he said, why, David, yes, I do know. I know of 4 different things you could direct. And he said, come to Nibbler's, and we'll have lunch, and I'll tell you. So I went there, and before we even ordered, I said, Stuart, now tell me. And he said, okay, David, the first script is a story entitled The Elephant Man. And a small bomb went off in my head. Instantly, I knew. I said, that's it. That's what I want to do. I never heard the other 3 ideas. And that started us on a journey. Stuart, me, the 2 writers, and Jonathan Sanger, we went to 5 or 6 different studios to present this idea, and were turned down everywhere. No one wants to see a film about a monster like this. So Stuart was working, and Jonathan, they were both working with Mel Brooks. But I think Stuart gave the script to Anne Bancroft. She read it and really loved it, and she was the one that gave it to Mel to read. Mel loved it, and he said, okay, the 2 writers are in. Jonathan Sanger, you're in. Stuart, you're in. But who is this guy, David Lynch? And they said, well, Mel, he is a filmmaker. He made a film called Eraserhead. And Mel said, I've never heard of it. I need to see it. And when they told me Mel needed to see Eraserhead before I was going to be accepted or not, I said, it's been nice knowing you guys. And but as it turned out, Mel saw Eraserhead one afternoon at 20th Century Fox, and I was told to come there. And I was waiting outside the theater, and as the story goes, the doors flew open after the film was over, and Mel ran toward me, embraced me, and said, you're a madman, I love you, you're in. So that was how it started.
Life is full of surprises. Consider the fate of this creature's poor mother. Ladies and gentlemen, the terrible elephant man.
First time I heard the story of Joseph Merrick was probably when I had gotten a screenplay from my babysitter, possible directors, thinking about people who might be appropriate for this. Didn't know, I mean, I knew a number of directors, but I didn't know anybody who would be right for it, and I didn't really know how to approach somebody with a subject like this. And at the same time, I had just seen Eraserhead, and Stuart Kornfeld had David Lynch's phone number. So I called him up and I told him I thought his movie was really interesting. I'd love to meet him. And David said, well, sure, let's meet, you know. And we set up a meeting at Bob's Big Boy in Santa Monica Boulevard. And once we got through talking about Eraserhead, I asked him about other projects that he was doing, and he told me. And then he asked me about projects I was doing. And I mentioned I had just optioned a screenplay, a project called The Elephant Man. And his eyes like lit up. The Elephant Man. He says, well, could I look at it? I said, sure, I'll let you read it. Once he read it, he called me up and he said, you know, this is a fascinating story. Could we meet again? And at that meeting, David said, you know, I would really love to take a crack at this. I'd love to direct this. David came to Mel's office. Mel liked him immediately.
I felt I was dealing with a true artist with David Lynch. I felt that he was as close to the phenomenon of life and why we're here and why we have to die as any artist I'd ever met.
We decided immediately that David and Chris DeVore and Eric Berggren and I would have an office across the hall from Mel at Fox, and we would work on the screenplay.
He was a good guy, David. I mean, he usually young, hot-headed directors, you know, who have these, you know, lofty visions, they don't take advice from anybody. But he was simple. He was profoundly gifted and intelligent, and you knew that you're going to get a work of art.
Stand up.
Stand up.
Turn round.
Turn around.
I was first involved with the whole business of the Elephant Man and everything to do with it by being asked to Mel Brooks' office.
John Hurt came to our office, not knowing, having read the script, but not knowing, you know, what we had in mind.
And so there I sat, and it was clear that the people who were interviewing me were quite nervous. And it didn't occur to me, oh yes, and in front of me, right in front of me, was a huge kind of drawing of John Merrick.
What we did was we went to the trouble of doing 8-foot by 10-foot blow-ups, photographic blow-ups of the Elephant Man himself. I mean, it was insane to spend this kind of money.
And eventually it was suggested that this might be the person that I was to play. Now, to me, it didn't even occur to me that there would be any problem in this at all, because this obviously would be something which was vastly interesting. What I didn't know at the time, that as far as Hollywood was concerned, they were talking about a part that was difficult to sell. And the reason it was difficult to sell was that the actor wasn't going to be wouldn't be recognized.
It was always our intention to hire somebody in that role who was a great actor, but not a household name, not somebody that everybody knew, and certainly not everybody in this country would know.
It was only long afterwards I realized that it was, oh my God, they went to all this trouble in order to spin me something that I just walked in and said, oh no, I want to do this.
He was swept off his feet, you know, and he said, you're not ever to say this to my agent, but I'll do this for nothing.
Once we had John Hurt, everything else built out from there.
He immediately joined the fold, and he was the Elephant Man. Even as he left the room, he suddenly was stooped and bent and twisted as he turned his way out. He was already getting into character.
It was only later from David Lynch that I understood why, because I did ask him. I said, why, for instance, did you ask me to do this? And he said, well, I'd seen The Naked Civil Servant, and I'd seen Caligula and I, Claudius. And in both occasions, he paid me the highest compliment that anybody could ever pay an actor, is that I didn't recognize the actor. And that is what I wanted for the Elephant Man.
David hadn't worked with actors of this fame, certainly, before, and he fell right into it. I mean, he was focused to a point right from the beginning.
He is English. He is 21 years of age. His name is John Merrick. Gentlemen, in the course of my profession, I have come upon many lamentable deformities of the face due to injury or disease, as well as mutilations and contortions of the body, depending upon like causes. But at no time have I met with such a perverted or degraded version of a human being as this man. The patient has been called the Elephant Man.
Treves was always somebody that we wanted the best English actor we could find. Anthony Hopkins was one of a handful of actors. Anne Bancroft had told us all that she thought he was probably the greatest actor living at that time. I mean, she was just, she was enthralled by his work.
Tony Hopkins is a great actor. He's probably one of the best actors that ever lived.
When he read the script, he wanted to do the movie.
I talk about Tony Hopkins because Tony Hopkins was very, very sensitive to what I had to do.
To have a group of actors like that, it makes life so much easier for David and consequently for myself.
Can you imagine the kind of life you must have had?
Yes, I think I can.
I don't believe so. No one could possibly imagine it. I don't believe any of us can.
The next obvious choice was Sir John Gielgud, who was, you know, an icon to us. Of course, we knew who he was, and he loved the idea. He was very interested in meeting David Lynch, and the synergy between him and David was quite wonderful.
Johnny Gielgud didn't feel it necessary to be that sensitive. He said, "Oh my goodness, Johnny, you make such moving noises."
We were expecting somebody who was so completely in control of themselves and so completely in control of the process, which he was to one extent, but to another extent, just as any actor might be, he was very concerned. Did we like it? Was he doing all right?
There's someone here who'd like to meet you. That's all right. May I introduce you to one of the bright lights of the English stage? Mrs. Kendall, Mr. John Merrick.
Good day, Mr. Merrick.
Anne Bancroft had read the script, loved the script, and David was unsure whether she would be interested in playing what was essentially a cameo, small role. She was thrilled to play the role. She loved the idea.
Anne Bancroft is an amazingly talented person. She plays a very famous actress.
Wendy Hiller, Mrs. Mothershead in the movie, was suggested to us by our casting director. And again, I mean, another icon of British theater and British films, and somebody that David and I were thrilled with. We met her. She was gracious. She was terrific.
Wendy Hiller I'd worked with before, of course. I worked with her in Man for All Seasons. I wouldn't have expected anything other than a mighty and superb performance, you know?
Mrs. Mother said I'll be in my room and I'm not to be disturbed, all right?
Of course, sir.
Will you come with me, please?
You heard what the doctor said? Go on.
One of the reasons we filmed in black and white, actually, had to do with the makeup. I mean, it was only one reason. I mean, I think we chose to film in black and white because we felt that achieving the look of the period and the feel of the period would be somewhat easier for us in black and white. The reason related to the makeup was the fact that what might look to some repulsive or awful in color would be fascinating in black and white.
It's a very expensive exercise to make it in black and white, but it did help give this Victorian illusion.
And we were shooting in true black and white. We weren't shooting on color stock black and white. We were shooting on black and white stock, which was very hard to get anyway, because they're usually only sold to students.
They said, shoot it in color and we'll take the color out of it. We said no.
In retrospect, yes, black and white was a much better bet. Be interesting to see it in color, but it wouldn't have had the same atmosphere.
I'm a cameraman. If you ask me to do it in black or white or color, we just do it.
Freddie Francis, I mean, to the trade, is known as maybe the best lighting cameraman in the world.
There's only one thing I can do in life, and that is make films. So whatever I'm doing, providing it's connected with making films, I'm happy.
My good friend Freddie Francis was a real guide. I mean, he was wonderful throughout.
Excuse me.
The Elephant Man.
I had previously heard about this film being made, and I'd wondered who was doing the makeup, and I'd asked around in the business, but nobody really seemed to know who would be doing the makeup anyway, and it took quite a while to find out.
David had done a makeup design for the movie himself, and it was a complex makeup design, very very much based on the original man, but John Hurt had lost weight and looked quite different when he arrived than he had when David had met him in Los Angeles months earlier. And it was pretty clear when we saw him, which was a week before we were ready to start shooting, that the makeup was not going to work.
It had to work facially. The muscles had to move. The teeth had to be right. Everything had to be. And I think David was well aware of that. But he thought somehow that that would be able to be somehow would happen in the process.
Eventually, they all arrived on my doorstep on one Thursday afternoon when I was very busy, because at the time I was doing a film for Warren Beatty called Reds, and quite a few other things as well, so I was really very busy indeed.
David had chosen Chris to do the makeup because he thought he was the best person for it, and Chris was.
They all arrived on the doorstep and showed me pictures of the Elephant Man and all the rest of it, and I said, well, really, I don't think I can get involved in this. It's really, you know, I mean, it's going to take weeks to do this. It's not something I can deliver by Monday morning.
And he immediately told us that it was going to take him 5 weeks probably to design this and build it and get the pieces ready and everything else. And 5 weeks was way, way beyond what anything we had imagined it would take.
In order to get me really embroiled in this production, they got me to go and have a look at the last mortal remains of the Elephant Man at the London Hospital Museum. So I was duly dragged off there and shown, you know, all the skeleton of him and the plaster cast, the death mask that was made at the time.
David and I spoke to the curator of the London Hospital Museum and asked him if we could borrow the life cast to bring to our makeup artist's workshop so that he could actually work off the real cast.
The plaster cast actually had hair growing out of the plaster. It wasn't literally growing out of the plaster, it was where it had been cut off.
Now, I mean, I don't even know if I would have made this request if I had been a little more knowledgeable, sophisticated, been in the business longer. But I just, you know, we had nothing to lose by asking. And I think as a result of our openness about the request, this man, Percy Nunn, said, you know what, yeah, sure, you can have it. And it was amazing. There is only one live cast. I mean, if we dropped it, it's gone, it's over. And we had to take it out of this glass case, move it into Christopher Tucker's workshop so that he could work from it and off of it and model what he was doing off of the original cast.
And the plaster cast was, in fact, rather smelly at the time. I think we gave it a bath. It was probably the first bath it had in 100 years or so, but it certainly needed it.
Prosthetic makeup was in its infancy at that time. Everything had to be baked every night in molds and so on, you know, and if it had a little air bubble in it, that had to be thrown out, had to be another, and so on and so on. So I mean, and when we were dealing at that time with 22 different parts.
The design challenges were trying to get the joins, and the technical problems of trying to get the joins in the right place so that at least the individual sections, it would have to be built up by section after section. Secondly, the head, the top part, had to have hair in it. It would be very difficult to make a wig with a foundation that curved and undulated in the way that the Elephant Man's head did. So I conceived the only way to do that was to insert the hair into the head part. It was very difficult to work it all out at first, obviously, because it was quite daunting to look at this incredibly deformed Elephant Man and then look at a normal person like John Hurt, who was fairly slim, and try and figure out how on earth to make everything stick. It meant perhaps we'd have to shave his head, which I thought would be the first thing, get his own hair off so that at least we had something to fix to up here.
And we were working and trying to see how you could put that to a head to, you know, and make it and so on and so forth. And so it was 20 hours a day. I know, it was an enormous amount of time, enormous amount of work.
I wanted the teeth in there before we did any casts or anything else, so that I got him to work with the teeth. He could actually speak perfectly, well, not perfectly normally, but he could speak very normally with the teeth in. In the film, he didn't do this because the real Elephant Man could hardly be understood at all. The Elephant Man, the real Elephant Man, had got a wisdom tooth impacting on the top here, actually touching, and he got a large protuberance of bone coming out on the jaw that went right round to the back of the spine. So he couldn't open his jaw at all. The jaw on the real Elephant Man would hardly move. I mean, it could move, what, 2 or 3 millimeters. That's all it could move. Recently, one of the scientific journals I read, I think last week, they were actually referring to the Elephant Man and the fact that he did have a progressive disorder and 3 different problems. He had pituitary gland, a bone growth with massive calcification of the bone, and also neurofibromatosis, which gave these large, warty, smelly masses of flesh.
We were working 20 hours a day. Chris was sleeping in he had a tiny little studio in the old Kent Road in London, and he literally wasn't getting home or anything. He was sleeping, getting up, working.
I was terribly tired. I was insured for something like £1 million or £1.5 million or something in case I got run over by a bus. Fat little chance there was of that. I couldn't get out of the door.
But then I became aware that David wanted to introduce the Elephant Man in his full makeup much earlier in the script than I felt was right or proper.
He was scripted to appear earlier, and he did appear earlier with this costume arrangement over his head. And that was the sort of teaser, if you like, in a way.
While I think we always intended to do that to a certain extent, we were forced into doing it even more than we had originally planned because of the problems of getting the makeup done and right.
When we discussed it earlier, I said, David, wouldn't it be a wonderful notion, wonderful idea if we saw little pieces, fragments, snatches of the Elephant Man without really seeing a full-fledged shot of him? And he thought it was a good idea.
Why is he sitting up like this? He needs rest.
Well, that's how he sleeps. If he lies down, he'll kill himself. His head's too big.
After working for 8 weeks odd or so, the time came to assemble the makeup and try and stick it all on for the first time and make sure it all worked. And I said to John, well, what are the chances, what are the odds on you sleeping in it then, man, for the night? And we actually propped him up against the wall to try and get him to sleep, but he suffered from the same problem that the real Elephant Man did, because he said, well, you know, if I put my neck back, it'll break.
The makeup had to be both believable and doable.
Just remember, the entire film hinged upon this. The entire cast and company were told that if the makeup didn't work, that was it. Their film was a goner.
My recollections of the day when the makeup was first applied probably has got to be one of the most frightening days of my life.
We sent John Hurt over to his studio because he was going to make him up the first time there and then bring him to our studio where we were going to be setting up and ready to do a film test.
It took 12 hours to apply the makeup, which is already 2 men's working days, you know, back to back.
Believe me, I was on the phone every 10 minutes with Chris Tucker. When's he going to be ready? Don't worry about it. It's going to happen. He'll be there.
I'd been seeing the makeup since the first thing that morning. I kept going off the set, looking at it because, I wanted to see every stage of it, because if I'd have seen at an earlier stage it was going wrong, I would have stopped it then. I wasn't going to wait for 5 hours and then sort of say, I didn't like the way you were doing it.
We discussed the makeup with the hairdresser who was there, you know, the way the hairstyle was going to be. And then I did some colour photographs, and these are, in fact, the only colour photographs that exist of the Elephant Man. And then we piled into the Winnebago, and off we went to the studios at Wembley. I did say, what happens if we break down? I said, well, if we break down, I'm disowning you. I'm nothing to do with you. I said to John Hurt, you can walk about in the street, but I don't want to know you.
And then I was brought on to the set to a stunned silence. If anybody had broken that silence with the slightest giggle, the film would be finished.
And we saw him in this makeup for the first time, complete, so that it wasn't, we never saw the process, we just saw the result.
So there we stood, like the freak. There we were, John Merrick, standing there, as vulnerable as you could be.
We went up the staircase into the little room in the attic that had been built, and he went straight in and did his 23rd Psalm.
Hopkins did half of, the scene, and then turned, looked at David and I and said, and smiled and nodded his head, and we all knew, just visually we knew that it was going to work.
Tony Hopkins, yeah. If it were not for him, had he not behaved that way, at that moment on that day, it would have been destroyed.
Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff.
Mr. Cargon? Yes, what is it? Stand. I didn't teach him that part.
And mercy will follow me all the days of my life. And I dwell in the house of the Lord.
The scenes that particularly touch me, there's a scene where Merrick is at Treves' house, when he goes to Treves' house and meets Treves' wife, played by Hannah Gordon.
I can look back at the tea scene in complete horror. That was the very day, really. That was a 12-hour makeup that day. And it was the very day I thought they found a way of making me not be able to make movies.
Mr. Merrick, I'd like you to meet my wife, Anne. Anne, this is John Merrick.
I'm very pleased to meet you, Mr. Merrick.
What's the matter?
I just that I'm not used to being treated so well by a beautiful woman.
Would you like a cup of tea, Mr. Merrick?
It's a good idea.
When did I actually go home feeling that I'd done something that was mine? It was when he was given the present.
Your dressing case.
This ridiculous vanity present, ivory and things in order to make him look so splendid. I suppose I did feel that I'd done something special that day.
Our fondest desires were to have a movie that actually played in a theater. I mean, that was really as far as we would take it. So to be nominated for 8 Academy Awards was just remarkable.
And interestingly, it didn't win any Oscars.
In those days, there were no awards for makeup, but The Elephant Man was the one that the Hollywood Union pointed to finally for the Academy. They'd been badgering for years for an Academy Award for makeup, and they pointed to The Elephant Man and said, well, if that's not worth an Academy Award, what is?
Charles Champlin was the critic at the LA Times, and a week before the Academy Awards, he indicated in one article that it would be between Freddie Francis and I think it was Michael Chapman for Raging Bull, and Freddie Francis hadn't been nominated, but he hadn't even realized that he hadn't been nominated.
The fact that Freddie Francis should have been left out I don't know the history of that, but it is, to me, extraordinary.
Whenever I do a film, I think, well, that deserves an Oscar, but then I forget about it.
I remember getting into Hollywood and somebody saying to me, I forget who it was now, but they said, well, John, it's great you're here. Just a shame you ain't gonna get it. And I said, well, I quite agree with you. I don't think I'm gonna get it either. Because I'll tell you, I think Robert De Niro's going to get it because it's his year, and that's absolutely right. But just out of interest, why do you think I'm not going to get it? And he said, well, nobody can see who you are. To which I replied, rather naively, I thought that was the point.
I am not an animal! I am a human being!
In a sense, Elephant Man had a huge effect on my career.
Yes, of course, it's a milestone in my career. It'd be a milestone in anyone's career. It was a marvellous thing to have done, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity to have done it.
I remember the overall picture, which I was very happy with, and the actual making of the picture was a very happy experience. We had, because my relationship with David and Jonathan developed.
I said to Jonathan, aren't you proud to be part of this? And he said, you betcha. You know, he said, we were so proud.
I'm very proud of the film, and I'm glad it's finally going to get a chance to be seen in the way that it was intended to be seen.
Well, I would say that if you can manage to get to the end of The Elephant Man without being moved, I don't think you'd be someone I'd want to know.
It's the trees. There's something that I've been meaning to ask you for some time now.
What's that?
Can you cure me?
No. No, we can care for you, but we can't cure you.
No. I thought not.
Suscríbete y toca la campanita, así podremos avisarte cada vez que haya un nuevo vídeo disponible.